Hi, this is Talia Argandesi, the Director of the Center for Writing and Speaking. I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking to you about working with sources, giving you some information that will be useful for your writing your CIE papers and any papers in college. And as we go through, you should have an accompanying worksheet that has 5 exercises on it. Anytime you need to pause the video to work on the worksheet, just pause it and you can come back to it where you left off. The first exercise is going to be about the meal plan. This is a concept that helps you figure out what you should put into your body paragraphs. So it's not a formula, it's not strict. You don't have to follow it like a robot every single body paragraph. But it is a sort of set of guidelines or recipe, a sense of what a good full paragraph looks like. And meal is an acronym. Each letter stands for something that you can remember to put into your paper. So the M in meal stands for main idea. A question to ask yourself is just, what claim are you making in this paragraph? Think about how your whole paper has a thesis statement, and that's the claim that you're trying to prove in the paper. Each paragraph works like that too. It can have like a topic sentence is a concept you may have heard of before. Your topic sentence is your main idea for that paragraph. The E in meal stands for evidence, and evidence is whatever sources you have that support, refute, or complicate your main idea. In CIE, your evidence a lot is quotations and paraphrases from the CIE texts, and sometimes it is also observations from your own experience. Depending on your assignment and your professor, evidence can be any of those things. But your main idea will only be convincing if you give some evidence to back you up. Anytime you give evidence in a paper, you also want to give analysis, and that's the A in meal plan. Questions to ask yourself is just, what does your evidence mean? What is interesting or noteworthy about your evidence? So you're not just supplying evidence, you're not just restating what a text says, but you're also trying to bring some insight into it. Your audience, your reader, isn't always going to know what your evidence means. I don't mean on the surface level, I mean at a sort of deeper level. Analysis means to break things into its component parts. So you want to sort of break down or unpack your evidence every time you give it in a CIE paper. And the L in meal plan stands for link. Questions to ask yourself are, how does this relate to the overall main idea of your essay, and how does this relate to other ideas in your essay? So you might think of there as being 2 different kinds of links. One link from like sort of little transitions from idea to idea, from sentence to sentence, and probably more importantly, the big overall link to your thesis statement, and that will give your paper a feeling of coherence. So if you need to fill out the rest of exercise 1, pause the video now, and then we'll move on. Here's some examples of paragraphs that follow the meal plan. Pause the video for a second to just read this paragraph. You can see that the paragraph follows the meal plan pretty explicitly. The first sentence is the main idea. It goes into giving some evidence, that's a quote from a book. Then it spends 2 sentences analyzing that evidence, bringing a little insight into it. And the final sentence is a link to the main idea of the paper. It's pretty simplistic though. Your college level paragraphs are probably not going to be that straightforward, MEAL. So here's an example of more of a representative college level paragraph. Pause the video for a second to read this paragraph. You can see that this paragraph starts with a link. It's a good idea to have your topic sentence start with a little bit of a reference back to the previous paragraph, and then move on to give the main idea of the current paragraph. This student's paragraph also has a link from the main idea to the evidence. And then this teal part is evidence, which is quotations from an article. And then it spends 2 sentences analyzing the evidence and preparing the way for a little bit more reinforcing evidence that comes right here. And the final sentence is a question that links this paragraph to the main idea of the paper. So now you're going to do the second exercise on your worksheet. It's this paragraph. What I want you to do is Label each sentence in this paragraph either M, E, A, or L, depending on its function, whether it's a main idea, a piece of evidence, analysis, or link. So pause the video and do exercise 2. Okay, next I'm going to give you some ideas about what you can actually use the meal plan for. And if that's what you can use the meal plan for is also going to be the question for exercise 3 on your worksheet. So one thing you can do is before you even start writing, you can use the meal plan as a sort of brainstorming activity. So take a blank sheet of paper, write a provisional thesis statement right in the middle of the page, and draw a circle or box around it. And then you're going to use the meal plan to sort of extend out from there. So brainstorm supporting materials around that thesis statement that could become your body paragraphs. So if you have your whole main idea, your thesis statement for the whole paper, first you would think about some like maybe 2 pieces of evidence. Things you remember reading about in the text or something that happened in your experience that you feel like is going to be really good reinforcement of your thesis statement. And you can also sort of branch out from your thesis statement to think of main ideas that could become the topic sentence of paragraphs. So observations about the CIE text or general your ideas about the world, those can make main idea sentences in your paragraphs. And then once you have this sort of thesis statement in the middle with evidence and main ideas around it, you take those little branches that have come out of your thesis statement and draw branches coming out from there that fill in the remaining elements of the meal plan. Another thing you can do with the meal plan is, once you've already written a draft, ask yourself whether each of your paragraphs is a complete meal. So you can do what we just did in exercise 2, like label each sentence in your paragraph M, E, A, or L, and then if you have some sentences in your paragraphs that don't do any of those things, ask yourself, like, can I just cut this sentence because it's not doing anything? And then probably even more importantly, if you have a paragraph that doesn't have a main idea or doesn't have any evidence, doesn't have anything from the text, or it gives a lot of evidence but doesn't analyze it, or it has M, E, and A, but it doesn't link back to your big idea in the paper, you have to revise that paragraph so that it feels more complete. And then another thing, this is really useful that you can use the meal plan for, is once you've written the paper, find all your sentences in each paragraph that is a main idea sentence and kind of like look at them alone. Ask yourself, do they flow logically from one to the next? So like, do they seem to be in any particular logical order? And when you have a new main idea, does it build off of the ideas that you had in your previous paragraphs? And those main idea sentences, could you switch the order of them without changing the paper? If that is true, then that's actually bad. You want the order of your paragraphs to be really necessary and specific. So right now, if you need to pause the video to answer the question in exercise 3, go ahead and do that. We're going to talk about evidence. As I mentioned before, your evidence in a CIE type paper can be quotations or paraphrases from the CIE texts or from any other text that your teacher assigned. And sometimes, depending on your teacher and depending on the assignment, they can also be anecdotes and observations from your life. So we'll talk about each one of those. It's important to know what to quote and why you're quoting. You don't have to have big quotations. Just choose them really carefully to make your point, and don't use too much text. You only need to quote words and phrases that cannot be rephrased and words and phrases that justify further discussion. Everything else you can paraphrase. Let's talk about formatting. First of all, there's a bunch of different styles that are all equally important and all equally adequate. Find out which formatting style your professor wants, and then just follow that. That goes for all papers throughout college. Often in CIE, people use MLA, and the MLA format is pretty simple. You set it up in one of two ways. If you mention the author in your sentence, you say this, like Smith explains or whatever. Give the quotation, end the quotation marks, then you have a space, open parentheses, page number, close parentheses, and then your punctuation. Or if you don't mention the author's name, you just paraphrase it, or you just introduce it. One theory on how the economy works is that quotation, and then you put, again, end the quotation, put a space, parentheses, author's name, just another space, no punctuation here, and then the page number, end the parentheses, and put the punctuation. That's it. It's very simple. All you have to do is one of those two things when you format a quotation. So think about what we said about how you don't need a long quote. You just need a small, efficient quote to get the job done. And do exercise 4 on your worksheet, choosing quotations carefully. You'll have to pause the video to complete this. Okay, now let's talk about paraphrasing. A good paraphrase carefully and accurately reflects the source's meaning and intentions, but doesn't use the actual words of the source. It's in your own words. Something to keep in mind when you format a paraphrase is that you still have to include a citation when you refer to the author's ideas, even if you don't have a direct quote. So look at this sentence. Smith believes that regulations redirect capital rather than producing it, and that markets are able to regulate themselves. Here, it looks almost like when you do a quotation, except that there are no quotation marks. So you still have space, parentheses, page number, and it can be a page range, that's fine too, and the parentheses and put the punctuation. So don't forget to include a citation when you paraphrase. And let's do an exercise about paraphrasing too. Here's a kind of complicated quotation from The Allegory of the Cave. Pause the video and on your worksheet, try to put this passage into your own words while being careful to maintain all of Plato's meaning. And also don't forget to put in your citation. So pause the video now and work on that exercise. And I wanted to also mention, if you're allowed to use anecdotes, that is, things that happen to you in your actual life, keep in mind that there's still a good way to do that versus a weaker way. If you've heard the expression showing versus telling, it's better to show in your paper when you give an anecdote than to just tell. So an example of telling is saying something like this: he was angry. But showing is more like this: he stomped out of the room with his brow furrowed. At the door he turned to me and shouted, "I'll never return." Your audience, your reader, can see and hear and smell and taste and touch what's happening in this. They don't need to be told that the person is angry because they can see that for themselves. So it's better to do it that way. Imagery means including anything that the audience can see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. So that's what you're shooting for when you give anecdotes from your own life. A couple final hints. You might want to pause the video and just read this slide real quick, but it's all the different options for syntax, sentence structure you can use when you're introducing a quotation. Keep in mind that the parenthetical citation kind of always looks the same. Something that's even better though, instead of having these introductory phrases than having a whole long quotation, is if you fully integrate the quote like this. Locke describes political power as the right of making laws, among other functions. That's sort of just smoother. It shows that you have control over the quote, and that's your goal here. And here's another slide you might want to pause. This is just a bunch of examples of verbs that you can use when you're introducing an author. So instead of just always saying, Locke says this, Locke says that, says, writes, there's all these different great verbs that mean something similar to says, but are a little more detailed, and giving that variety can really make your writing a lot better. So that's it. This is a list of my sources, and I hope that this was helpful to you, and you can always email me, or I guess I should say email the Center for Writing and Speaking at cws@ourscience.edu, or visit our website, which is right here. If you Google Ursinus Writing Speaking, it'll come up. Thank you.